Buddha's answer to meaning of life. What meaning will you give it? One of the Buddha's insights on the night of his awakening was that the universe doesn't have any purpose, doesn't have any meaning. It just goes around and around and around. As he said later, it would be very hard to find someone who hadn't been your mother in all that long, long time, your father in all that long, long time. Sister, brother, son, daughter. Relationships come and go. They don't lead anywhere. There are passages in the texts where the Buddha gives a pretty bleak picture of life and the world at large. Like that chant just now, the world just passes away. There is no one in charge. It's a slave to craving. In other words, there is no grand design to give meaning to life or the world. Things are simply driven by blind craving. There is another passage where the Buddha talks about the way beings wander on in this world. It's like throwing a stick up into the air. Sometimes it lands on this end. Sometimes it lands on that end. Sometimes it lands splat in the middle. No real pattern, no real direction. This doesn't mean that life is hopeless, but it means simply that life doesn't have a meaning unless you give it a meaning. So that's the real question. It's not what is the meaning of life. The question is, what kind of meaning do you want to give to it? This is where the practice comes in, because the practice gives direction. You want to understand the mind so you can understand why it is that even though everything we do is aimed at producing happiness, we often end up causing suffering, pain, and disappointment instead. Why is that? And as the Buddha pointed out, it's within our power to learn, to understand why. That quest to learn and to understand is what gives meaning to life, gives direction to life in a way that nothing else can. You look at the things that people try to accomplish in life, in the world outside. The world seems designed to just grind everything down. You want this kind of relationship, but the relationship just falls apart. You want to develop a nice, strong body. Well, it gets strong for a while. Then it starts getting sick. Then it gets old and you're left with nothing. You want to accomplish something large in the world, but then the economy collapses. War comes, famine comes, all kinds of things can happen. So looking to the world for meaning is a frustrating, very frustrating experience. But when you look inside for meaning, you find that there is a lot to learn. There is a lot to understand. Things do get accomplished. As you work on the path, you begin to see how the mind creates a thought world, and you realize that you have the choice to go into that thought world or not. As you develop more and more mindfulness, more and more alertness, you understand these processes of the mind. Through understanding them, you can free yourself from them. You don't have to be their slave, the world that's a slave to craving. You don't have to get into that world. As the Buddha said, the process of learning about these things is not accompanied by disappointment and sorrow. It's accompanied by joy, a sense of release that comes when you realize that you've been doing something really stupid for a long, long time, and now you've seen through it. You've understood it. You've gone beyond it. You really can cut through and free yourself from the defilements of the mind. When the path comes together in the mind, you see on the one hand that there is such a thing as the deathless, and on the other hand that you've attained it through mastering your own intentions, understanding the process of the mind. There is more to experience than simply the conditioned and fabricated things we normally experience. That right there cuts through a lot of fetters. It's like cutting off your arm, which may not be a pretty idea, but once the arm is cut off, it's off. And even though the doctors may try to sew it back on, it's never quite the same. There is such a thing as a permanent change. And even without getting to the noble attainments, you find that having more mastery and more understanding over the processes of the mind puts you in a much better position. You understand yourself better. You cause less suffering for yourself. You understand other people better and cause them less suffering as well. So this is a project that's really worth giving your life to. And it gives meaning to your life. It gives a direction to your life. You develop a new relationship to yourself. Ultimately, you get to the point where you don't need a sense of identity. But in the meantime, you develop a skillful sense. There is a sense of self-esteem that comes with knowing that you can learn. No matter how old you are, no matter how little or how much time is left to your life, you can still learn. The issue came up a while back. People who are really driven to accomplish things, really driven to develop a sense of self around their accomplishments, are noticing that that causes a lot of stress, a lot of pain and anxiety. But the answer is not to have no accomplishments or to have no desire for accomplishments. The answer lies first in really getting a strong sense of what is a genuine accomplishment in life, and second, gaining a skillful sense of yourself around the process of trying to attain that accomplishment. What this comes down to is two things. The first is having a willingness to learn. If that's where your sense of identity, your self-esteem is focused, it's skillful. To gain the ability to look at something you've done and realize that there may be something wrong here. But that doesn't have to threaten your identity. It just calls forth your desire to learn more about what did you do wrong, why was it wrong, what could you do in the future not to repeat that mistake. A second aspect of this more skillful sense of self is a sense of self that understands what's an important question. What's an issue that's worth pursuing, and what are the issues you don't really have to pursue? Here again, the practice gives you a good, strong direction. Any issue related to why there is suffering and what you can do to put an end to it. That's an important issue. You hear about people who are suddenly told by their doctors they have, say, 3 months or 3 weeks to live, and they suddenly develop a very strong sense of what they really want out of the remainder of their life. They clear away all the distractions and focus on what's really important. And it's good that they do that. But it's sad that they had to wait for a death sentence before they do. We have to remember we are all here with a death sentence. It's simply that we don't have the days marked out for us, how much longer it's going to be. But we do know that we have a limited amount of time, yet we tend to forget that. We act as if we didn't know. So keep that in mind. Death is down the line. Maybe even before death, illness will come and make it more and more difficult to practice. So the question is, what are the really important things you want to take care of while you've still got the chance? This is the big issue. Looking at your own actions to see where they cause suffering and stress, and to figure out how you can act in a way that doesn't. And the skills you learn in the process of focusing on that important issue will serve you in good stead all the way through aging, all the way through illness, and all the way through death. The ability to keep your mind focused on what's important and to put aside unimportant things, the willingness to learn all the time, those abilities will always serve you in good stead. So this is how we give meaning to life, finding an issue that gives direction and focuses on the really important problems in life, that has the potential to take us to some place where real changes can be made, changes that make a true difference. It's one of the reasons why Dhamma practice is something you really can give your life to, because it gives meaning back to your life. Meaning and happiness. Outdoors. One of the Buddha's insights on the night of his awakening was that the universe doesn't have any purpose, doesn't have any meaning. It just goes around and around and around. As he said later, it would be very hard to find someone who hadn't been your mother in all that long, long time, your father in all that long, long time. Sister, brother, son, daughter, relationships come and go. They don't lead anywhere. These insights can be very alienating because our minds want purpose. We live based on desire. We have goals. That's how we find meaning in life. A life without meaning is a life that no one would want to live. The Buddha's realization was that you have to give meaning to yourself. But if you look for meaning in relationships, they can be relationships of power, relationships of wealth, human relationships of almost any kind. They all fall apart. Either the relationship turns bad or it stays good and one side has to die. That's where he decided that the only really worthwhile meaning you can give to yourself is to look for something that doesn't die, something that's worth the effort that goes into it. So he offered this as a challenge. First, it was a challenge to himself, and he was able to fulfill it. Now he offers it as a challenge to everyone else. When a deathless happiness is possible, do you want to content yourself with anything less? The problem, of course, is that he couldn't take that deathless happiness out and show it to anybody. Ajahn Mahabua once said that if you could take Nibbana out and show it to people, they wouldn't want anything else. But it's pakatam as we chant, something that each person has to find for him or herself alone. And on top of that, there are so many people out there clamoring for your support in whatever they think is a happy life. Ajahn Fuang talks about parents who don't like to have their children meditate. They like to content themselves with the idea that they did as best as possible by having a family and finding meaning in the family, And when the children start looking for something more than that, the parents feel threatened. They try to pull the child back into looking for happiness in relationships. Ajahn Fuang's comparison is of someone who stepped in dog shit and then tries to get everyone else to step in dog shit. So think carefully about where you're going to find meaning in life, where you're going to find happiness. It's such an important issue that you'd think people would really be careful about where they look for examples. But we have this tendency. So-and-so says they're happy. Well, maybe they really are happy. I'm miserable. This path is taking a long, long time. Why don't I follow them? Well, look carefully at the people you take as your examples. People's mouths have no laws. They can say anything they want. You have to look at them, look at their behavior, look at where their happiness is going. Decide who you want to listen to. This one of the reasons why Sanghanusati, recollection of the Sangha, is so useful, especially when you're going away from the monastery. We're surrounded by so many people with so many different opinions, and anything goes in this land of wrong view. So it's good to keep alive in your mind the fact that there have been real people who were able to find real happiness, true happiness, through developing qualities of their minds. Qualities like generosity, virtue, renunciation. As we're sitting here, right now, that's a type of renunciation. Renouncing our fascination with sensual pleasures and looking for something deeper. Discernment, endurance, effort, truthfulness, determination, goodwill, equanimity. These are all good qualities to develop inside. And a life devoted to developing them is a meaningful life. It heads someplace. A life devoted to relationships just ends with death or separation. But a life devoted to the perfections leaves you with the perfections you've developed. You carry those over to the next life. You can build on them from there, amassing more and more over time. So keep in mind the people who have lived this way. We have examples in the canon, the Therigatha, Theragatha, the suttas that tell us about the monks and nuns who came from all kinds of backgrounds and had all kinds of problems in their minds, and yet were able to work through their problems. We have the lives of the Ajahns. They give us examples. This is how human beings can live. They can live deliberate lives, lives where they've thought through all the implications of what they're doing, what they really want, and trim things down, pare things down, that get in the way of that object, get in the way of that purpose, that meaning. The Pali word atta means many things, meaning, purpose, and benefit. So what is your atta? What is your benefit? What is your purpose? What is your meaning? I've told you the story of my friend who was an author. She taught at a university, and every time she wrote a novel, she would be invited to the different alumni clubs to read from her novel. So she had to choose an incident in the novel that was a nice, self-contained episode that she could read in about 15 minutes. For her last novel, the episode she chose was the story of a young woman who lost her mother. Her father at first says he's not going to remarry, but then he does remarry. He marries a courtesan. But the courtesan is a good woman. One evening, she's playing chess with the young girl. And as they're playing chess, she tells her, if you really want to be happy in life, you have to decide that there's one thing you want more than anything else. And you're willing to sacrifice everything else for that one thing. The young girl's half listening, half not listening, and she begins to notice that her stepmother is a sloppy player, losing pieces here and there, so the young girl gets more aggressive. What happens, though, is she falls into her stepmother's trap. Checkmate. The stepmother was illustrating her story by the way she played chess. She was willing to lose some pieces, but she kept one thing in mind, that she wanted to win the game. My friend read the episode to 2 or 3 alumni clubs, and she realized she had to choose another episode to read from the novel. Nobody liked the message. Everyone wants to keep all their pawns, keep all their pieces, and win. But life doesn't work that way. We have to make sacrifices. It's a principle of the Dharma. If you see a lesser happiness that gets in the way of a greater happiness, you have to be willing to give up the lesser happiness for the sake of the greater. A British translator of that passage wrote a footnote saying that this couldn't possibly be the meaning of this verse. It's too simple, too basic. Who needs a Buddha to tell us that? It may be simple, it may be basic, but nobody wants to hear it. That's why we're so miserable. True happiness requires sacrifice, dedication. It requires determination. It requires conviction. It requires circumspection. Be very careful about how you choose your models. Don't listen to just anybody. Once you've chosen a good model, see what's getting in the way of following that model. Be willing to give up the things that get in the way. Hold on to the things that are maybe difficult to do, but have to be done. And try to keep your mind calm in the midst of all this. In other words, don't get excited by somebody who comes along and says, well, I found happiness with drugs, or I found happiness with relationships, or I found happiness with whatever. Your happiness is something too important for that kind of attitude. So take it seriously. Not in a grim sense, but take it seriously. And give your life a focus that really does give it meaning. You can think of the Buddha. He worked all those many, many lifetimes to become Buddha, not only for his own purpose, but also so that he could teach. But there was a fascinating incident right after his awakening. He began to have second thoughts about that teaching career. This got a Brahma all upset, so the Brahma came down to invite him to teach, saying that there are people who have little dust in their eyes. They'll understand. And the Buddha confirmed this with his knowledge, so he decided to teach. Now the commentary tries to explain this away, saying that the Buddha didn't really mean it when he said he might not teach. He was just fishing for an invitation. But we have to remember, after the Buddha gained awakening, he had no debts to anybody. He taught not because he had to, or because when he was unenlightened, he had already made that vow. His decision to teach came out of total freedom from an awakened mind. He could have not taught because he didn't owe anything to anybody. That's the kind of happiness we should all look for. A happiness where we don't owe anything to anybody. Because otherwise we're constantly in debt. This person has helped us. That person has helped us. We have to think about those debts. There are people we've wronged. We have to think about those debts. But those debts are all wiped out at awakening. So think about that. The possibility of a totally debt-free happiness. A happiness that carries no obligations. Then, when any other forms of happiness are proposed to you, make sure you keep the Buddha's happiness in mind and that you keep your standards high.